Seconds. Okay, we are live, and you are in a deep winter edition of Stories at Sundown. I'm Michael McCullough from Willard Library, and I've got a special treat tonight. I have two guests, so it's like a bonus show with a bonus guest. And I'm just watching my technology here. I think the last time I was on here, we had terrible technology, so we're crossing our fingers tonight. But I'm really excited tonight. I have a couple of old friends and colleagues and guests to talk about the Mosaic Storytelling Showcase, which has been on a long hiatus because of this dang pandemic that just won't go away. But we're going to bring it back, and we're going to bring it back starting here on Stories at Sundown. Joining me tonight is Dick Strader, and I have a bio that Dick wrote for him, but I edited it down, Dick. I hope that was okay. It's a joke. Dick Strader, you know, he's been around here. He's had his career spans some 34 years as a library media specialist with the Marshall and Battle Creek Public Schools, and it was 10 years a children's librarian at Willard Library. So kind of full circle back to Willard Library, Dick. And he's been a storyteller since the 1970s. He's a member of the National Storytelling Network and has received his prestigious Oracle Award for his contributions to the storytelling community. And in addition to his performances for audience of all ages, Dick really enjoys helping people to discover the storyteller in themselves. And so welcome, Dick. So happy to have you. And then Nicole, she loves storytelling, and anybody who reads the Inquirer for the past, I don't know, 10 years. Has it been 10 years, Nicole?
Actually, it's been 16. So
16 years. Wow. Yeah. So on stage, on the page, over coffee, she's a produced playwright and published author. As I just mentioned, she is a longtime Battle Creek Inquirer columnist. 16 years. I'm starting to feel old too. And as a Mosaic storyteller. And right now she's earning her master's in playwriting at Western Michigan University, where she also teaches writing. So welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Yeah, this is going to be fun. And Nicole's got a special treat for us a little later tonight. But folks, as always, you can make comments if you're watching us on Facebook or YouTube. And we can put those up in the window. So we'd love to hear from you. But tonight, this is kind of a reunion of sorts, although we had a mini reunion last week when we talked about doing this program. But we worked together on the very first Mosaic Storytelling concert. And there's the shot from our first concert. Geez, I don't even remember what year it is, but boy, it's a lot of fun. And, you know, I just kind of want to start off by talking a little bit about what is storytelling. And Dick, or why don't we start with you, Dick? What is storytelling?
What is storytelling? Well, I kind of like to start with what storytelling is not.
Perfect.
Storytelling is not reading a book aloud, and it's not a lecture, and it's not a lot of things. But what it is just telling stories for fun is where I come from. But storytelling is probably the oldest of the arts. Storytelling probably started around the campfire many, many, many years ago, talking about the hunt for the day. And we tell stories for lots of different reasons. We tell stories of how things have happened, how things came to be. And storytelling is used in many different ways today, especially in the medical areas and in publishing and but I just like I really like folk tales. Those are the stories that have been handed down from one folk to another folk to another folk to another folk, and that's where I got into storytelling, was to tell the old traditional stories. But for the last few years, I've been getting into real stories, stories that are personal stories, and that's where Mosaic lies. Is telling stories of things that have happened to you, and that's so important because when I work with kids, I say, ask your grandparents about what it was like when they were young. And when I work with grandparents, I say, talk to your kids, your grandkids, you know, they want to know what it was like when you were young. And so storytelling's a way of just sharing about our lives and sharing where we've been and what we're about. It's how we spread and pass on our feelings and emotions and our beliefs. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah. And we've had, in the series of this concert, we've had some really, really powerful stories that people have shared.
oh,
Nicole, why don't you take a crack at that? What is storytelling to you?
I of course I love storytelling, but I really think all of us are storytellers because if you have friends, you're a storyteller because I think friendships are stories swapped over time, and we all have our favorites, and we all know people who can tell a good tale, and we never get tired of it. It can very easily walk up to someone, hey, tell us that story about that time you hit that curb or whatever. And even though we've heard that story a million times, we're willing to hear it again. And what I like about Mosaic is they're people stories, which we truly own. They're authentic stories. We're the only people who can tell them. And when you share a story, it's a gift. And especially in our Battle Creek community, we have such a diverse group of folks living in here, which is why I loved Mosaic, because I love hearing those authentic stories from good storytellers. Makes me feel closer to my neighbors and more deeply a part of my community.
Yeah. Yeah. On the screen here, we have Sean Washington. Sean should know we've been talking about him, how we'd like to bring him onto this program soon to do one of his stories. But what about the question, why? Oh, and there's me announcing all you fine folks. What about, why should we tell stories? And maybe even more poignant right now is why now?
I think there's a lot of healing that happens with stories. And I think especially when maybe this pandemic's making us feel like our world's a lot smaller, our stories kind of break through all walls, even virtual walls, and make us feel a lot closer. I don't know, Dick, what do you think?
Oh, I do. I think we all got some kind of a pandemic story, or many stories probably of things that have happened to us, whether we've had COVID or not had COVID, or known people that have, or and the things that COVID has interrupted in our lives, and so I think there's going to be a lot of stories following.
Yeah. Yeah. And this has been a really stressful time for folks for a long time. I mean, this has been to 2020, 2021, now we're into 2022. Our lives have been upended. Our routines have been uplet. Sometimes we haven't been able to see family. Sometimes we've lost. We've had some pretty serious losses. What about storytelling and well-being? I mean, I think you said it just a minute ago, Nicole, that there's healing involved in storytelling. What does that do for us as people? Storytelling.
I think it helps us understand each other better. And when I think about how, especially in America, how we're becoming so polarized, it's one or the other. What I like about stories is they very naturally fill that gap of humanity that connects all of us. It's really hard to put someone in a box when you hear their stories.
Yeah. And Dick, how about you? And how did you get into storytelling?
Well, I got into storytelling because I was a library and media specialist at the middle school level, and then suddenly I was thrust with having to be a middle school librarian that was in the elementary schools, and I found myself surrounded by first and second graders and kindergartners, and I didn't know what to do, because I knew what to do with a sixth grader, but I just wasn't quite sure what to do with the little ones. And so I started reading stories to them, but I found when I put the book aside and told the story, just something magical happens when you look somebody right in the eye, and right now Nicole's nodding her head. You get feedback from audiences, and that's some feedback right there. But it's a two-way street. Storytelling, you need a teller and you need a listener, and the third thing is imagination, and that's all of us.
Yeah.
And so it brings us all together.
Yeah. There's something special. And this, we've talked now for a couple of years now about how do we bring Mosaic back. Just to go back a little bit in history, it was a project of the Inquirer where I worked. But it was very much a community project, and it was enormously popular. I mean, you saw those crowds in that photo there, and they were all like that. And there's our first comment, Jamie. Hi, Jamie. But we were hesitant to do this virtually because that chemistry that you feel, that palpable sense of connection, is really what makes the whole event and the whole concert really special. But we're going to see if we can't figure out a way to get a little bit of some of that. But I should say up front that our grand plan is to bring back storytelling concerts in all their glory. And more important, and we'll share some information a little bit later about how you, the listeners, can get involved yourself, and maybe you're an old-time storyteller, or maybe you're just thinking about it. We'll talk a little bit about that. But we have to adapt in where we're at, and we just decided we didn't want to wait anymore. This will be kind of fun. So we're gonna start right now. Nicole has agreed to an on-command performance, and we're gonna go ahead and put her up solo. Anything you want to say about it before we put you up solo?
Me?
Yeah.
No, I will say this though. Shout out to anybody who's in Athens. I did tell this story at a showcase I did with Saga Presents, which was sort of like a part of Mosaic in a weird way. We did a concert in Athens to a completely sold out Kwanzaa hut. And this was a story that was a very enjoyable night. We had a great time in that community. So they might have heard it before, but for the rest of you, I don't think you would have heard this one before.
All right. Well, Nicole, thank you. You're always so gracious in taking on these challenges. No, you love storytelling. So
also, if I forget, I didn't really forget. Your computer's glitched. So just remember that.
Okay. All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I give you Nicole Mullis.
Okay. So about 4 years ago, I was in Athens High School watching my daughter play varsity basketball. We were the visiting team. That season, Athens was having what is best described as a special year. And my daughter's team was having what was best described as a rebuilding year. So the score was pretty lopsided. And at halftime, one of the parents from our side came up to me and asked me a question that actually I had been asked quite a bit in my years as a Battle Creek Inquirer columnist, which was, have you worked with Leslie Reardon? Now, the short answer is no. However, the first person to mention that name to me, Leslie Reardon, was shortly after I started writing the column in 2006. A complete stranger came up to me and said, hey, I liked what you wrote in the paper. It reminds me of Leslie Reardon. And since I didn't know this name, I contacted my friend who had lived in Battle Creek her whole life. And I said, who's Leslie Reardon? And she said, oh, she wrote a column for the Inquirer for a long time. She died in 1999 of cancer. You know, your work kind of reminds me of hers. And I was like, okay. And I was thinking, well, this makes sense, because if she died in 1999, I didn't move here until 2005. But this didn't stop people from coming up and asking this question over and over. In fact, I found Leslie's fans were quite passionate. One actually mailed me a package that had a copy of Leslie's book, which was a collection of her columns called People, Prayer, and Pot Roast. And the reader had written me a letter that said she wanted me to know who Leslie Reardon was. She wanted me to read her work. And she wanted me to know that this was not a gift, it was a loan. And she had a set of instructions for me to mail the book back to her. And I have to tell you, I was a little nervous holding this book. I mean, I didn't know her, but I was kind of unwittingly carrying her column legacy in the community. But I started reading it, and I really enjoyed it. I realized what people maybe saw in common between us is that we kind of worked out of the same set of source material: family, community, and, things that kind of strike us as funny now that might not have been that funny when it was actually happening to us. But probably the thing I liked the most about the book was at the end, Leslie had written this acknowledgement to her husband and her 2 daughters, saying that she understood it was probably hard for them to have a columnist in the family. And I embraced that because no doubt my husband and my 3 children also felt the same way. So I felt like, even though I didn't know Leslie, we shared that. I did give the book back. I didn't want to. Anyway, so fast forward to the gym. Parent asked me this question. I give the same answer I developed over the last 12 years, which was, nope, I never had the pleasure. Well, it turns out this parent didn't want to talk about the paper. What she wanted me to know was she coached one of Leslie Reardon's daughters, and that daughter had a daughter, and that daughter was on the team that was currently kicking our daughter's butts. And I was like, really? And I looked at the Athens girls basketball team, but you know what? I didn't know what the last name would be, and I didn't know what their child would look like. So by the 3rd quarter, I'd kind of forgotten this conversation. The game ended. We lost terribly. My husband was taking his customary cool down walk in the parking lot, which meant I was the parent sitting outside of the visitors' locker room waiting for my daughter to come out. And my mind was already into like other things I had to do, not the least of which was I had a deadline coming up, and I actually didn't have anything for that week's column. In fact, I was carrying my laptop on my back. I don't know why. I've never actually once ever written a column during a basketball game. But, when I'm on deadline, I kind of carry the laptop around like a cross. So this stranger comes up to me, who I didn't know, big smile, and she says, "Are you Nicole Mullis?" And I've also learned over the years, if a stranger knows my full name, they probably read the newspaper. So I said, yeah. And she was like, "Oh, I really look forward to your columns. They remind me of my mom's." And then she proceeds to introduce herself as Leslie Reardon's daughter. And I don't know what happened to me, but I started to get really nervous. And when I get nervous, I kind of talk real fast. So basically, I started talking, and everything I just told you, imagine that at 5 times the speed. And that was everything I was telling Leslie Reardon's daughter, up to and including my favorite column out of the book, which was about the time the family lost electricity. And Leslie thought her husband secretly loved when that happened. And I think the exact same thing about my husband, and on and on and on and on, until I feel his hand on my shoulder. And I turn around, and it's my daughter. And she's angry, she's defeated, she's sweaty. And I take one look at her, and I grab her by the front of the jersey and pull her in front of me and introduce her to Leslie Reardon's daughter, explaining who Leslie Reardon is, of course. And then I shut up, because Leslie Reardon's daughter and my daughter start having this conversation about what a pain it is to be a teenager when your mom's a columnist for the newspaper. I'm so into it. In fact, the only thing I could think about was, I'm totally writing about this next week. And I did. And the paper was really cool about it because they dug up some of Leslie's columns for the archives, including the one about the electricity going out in the house. And they ran it side by side with my column. So I could honestly say that Leslie and I worked together, sort of. And about 2 weeks later, I got a package in the mail. And it was a copy of Leslie Reardon's book, People, Prayer, and Pot Roast. And it was signed by Leslie Reardon's daughters under the inscription, "We're pretty sure Mom would have been your biggest fan." I absolutely treasured it. Not the least of which was because it was a gift and not a loan.
Wow.
Hi, Dick.
I put myself back in the stream. That was great.
Yes, please put people back in the screen.
Oh, that was awesome. First kudo. We're going to model a little bit about how we go through the process of telling, of learning how to tell stories. And there you have a great compliment from Lori Lee. But we have a process we call Kudos and Questions. And this is a key element, especially when you have folks who have not told stories before, but I think it's helpful for people who have told many stories before. Dick, why don't you kind of explain it for us?
Well, I like to, rather than tear a story apart, I like to tell people what it was that I really liked. What was good about your story? And then perhaps you have some questions. Maybe you didn't understand a piece, or maybe you'd like to know more about something in the story. And then if you ask the questions, those questions then can help the person telling the story as they tell that story again to maybe put in some of that information. So it's a process. It's a very positive process. And that's what we do with new tellers. When you tell your story, we first of all like to do kudos and then questions. And Nicole, I have so many kudos for that story. That was a beautiful story. But you did what so many tellers forget to do, and that's that the culmination, the thing that you really wanted to tell us about, it happened, but you led up to it. So when you do a story, you find out what it is that you really want to, the climax of the story, and then come back. And you gave us all that history of both of you before you got to the climax that honestly, I had chills going down my back when her daughter wrote what she wrote in the book. That was fantastic. I really liked that.
Yeah, I was pretty lucky.
Yeah,
that's tremendous. Yeah, I guess to add to everything that Dick said, kudos from a technique. I mean, just leaving aside the emotional piece of it. I really felt like I could have bumped into you in the produce aisle, and you just told this to me. It was very natural, and it was very relatable, and because of all that, you could just picture it all happening. I pictured you pulling your daughter by her jersey in front of you like a shield. And that was I mean, just really well told. And then because I worked at the Enquirer when Leslie passed, just kind of thinking back and knowing how much she meant to the community, and that really came across. And you were new. I mean, you came after her, but how much that connected with you.
And I have to tell you, writing the column in I only lived here for a year. I mean, I still needed a map to get around some places, but to know how much the community not only remembered her, but remembered her stories. And it spoke a lot to this community. And I know that it's more than Battle Creek, the area that the Enquirer serves. It's an interesting, tight-knit group of people. Very proud to have it be the town that I live in, I'll be honest.
I love the part where the two girls met, and then they discussed what agony it was to have a mother that's a reporter. And so that's another thing. You add a lot of humor to your stories, and we laugh a lot, but down underneath those laughs, there's really deep meaning, and that's a sign of a good storyteller.
Yeah. So I want to move on and talk a little bit about was the Irma Bombeck of the area. How about that? I want to move on a little bit, and just to carry on with that thread, Dick. Part of what we want to do is one, reconnect all the people who have done stories through Mosaic, but also reconnect with the community, and also help people develop their own storytelling. I don't know if it was the case later, but when I was still at the paper and still involved, a lot of those folks were first-time storytellers.
Yes.
And it's really intimidating. So why don't we talk a little bit, Dick, and Nicole too, but Dick, what tips do you have for people who want to begin their own storytelling journey?
Okay, I think I used to be afraid of telling personal stories. I stayed away from personal stories for a long time because I didn't think I had any story that was going to interest anybody else. And that's wrong because I found that I have a lot of things that are my story connects with other people's stories. And that's the beauty of Mosaic, is that when you tell your story, other people have stories that are similar, or they bring other things to the story. And that's one of the things that I love about storytelling, is hearing other people's stories after mine is told. But when you look at a story, there are the 3 P's: people, place, and problem. And I find that you have to have those 3 items in your story. So if you start with Nicole's story, who were the people in that story?
Oh, for me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. The parents sitting next to me, Leslie Verdon's daughter, and my daughter. If you don't have those characters, you can't tell this story. Oh, and the woman who sent me the book.
Right. So maybe just kind of thinking about an incident in your life, something that happened. We don't want to hear your whole life. We want to hear just one thing that was really important, or one thing that you did. And so begin listing the people that made that event happen. And then where does that take place? And you need to describe a little bit of the place, the gymnasium, the all of those kinds of things. And then what was the problem? What was the problem in your story, Nicole?
Well, my first problem is that my old editor, Annie Kelly, pointed out that she did not get a shout out for finding Leslie's columns. So thank you, Annie. Storytelling queen. My problem, I think my problem was, this is a problem, Dick. No, I think my problem was hearing about this person my whole time I was in Battle Creek, and kind of carrying her legacy and that connection, being able to meet, not her, but her daughter, and actually close that circle for me. Yeah. Also, I had a problem where I needed a column for next week, and so that was
Well, and then the problem of how do you deal with this history, and how do you come to grips with that? And that's a problem. You could have gotten angry and stomped away, or you could have cried, broken down and cried. There are lots of things that could have happened, but you solved that problem in a really mature way. And so that's part of what storytelling is about. What does that say?
Yes,
and I don't know if I'm going to leave that up long enough for people to copy that down.
It's on Facebook though, but
Thank you.
I'm lucky because I was a first-time storyteller when Mosaic started. In fact, Dick broke my heart when he told me I was not to memorize my story, but I had to know it by my heart. And he was right. It's a different feel. So Annie's pointing out that story was a column, but if you read the column, you'll see that they're the same story, but it's very different when we put it in this first person storytelling medium as opposed to print. It's two different animals, even though it's the same story.
Well, and that brings up, how do you tell a story, and how in your preparing that story, I don't want you to memorize the story word for word. That just doesn't work, because storytelling is a two-way street. And so you memorize the sequence of events, but maybe you don't get from sequence A to sequence B in the same way this time as the last time you told it. So if you memorize it and you have a mental block, you can't go on. And so that's I've been there.
Me too.
When you have a mental block. But if you know the sequence of your story, you can stop and take a breath and think, okay, this is where I am, this is where I need to go, and get there. And so I recommend that you do not write your story word for word. It's columns are great, but they're told differently than when you write them. It's storytelling isn't. It's all story, but it's storytelling is flexible, and it flows. And so I suggest to people that they tell that story, and they tell it and tell it and tell it. They tell it a number of times to maybe different people. And as they do, and you get your kudos and your questions, that helps you build the story for the next time. Is that?
I think, I don't know if this was Sean Washington, but I'm going to give him credit for it. There we are. Sean, I'm giving you credit for something that may not belong to you. But, I think about storytelling, in sections. It's sort of like, I know 7 different routes between my house and work, and I know how to make the trip long, how to make it short, how to take the scenic route, what to do, if there's a block. And that's sort of like storytelling. You still get from point A to point B, but based on how you're feeling that night, what type of reaction you're getting from the audience, you might take the scenic route home, because why not? Or if they look like they're spacing out on you, you might take a shortcut back home. And that's the flexibility as opposed to a memorized manuscript.
Well, and it strikes me that you really want to, and you just kind of said it already, Nicole, but you really want to be attuned to how people are receiving you. And so if you're focused on memorizing something, you're going to block that out. So I wanted to segue a little bit, Dick, and I put up a slide again. The tips that you have or how do you work with someone who is telling what is a difficult story, because sometimes they really are difficult. How do you work with them to help them get through that and tell their story for the first time and share that story?
Well, we have had some people tell some really serious and very troubling stories. Sometimes about death and other things that are difficult to talk about.
Yeah.
But they're a story that needs to be told, because the person telling that story benefits from that. And so I tell people, if they have a difficult story to tell, or a very troubling story, or one that's about death, perhaps, that they need to practice that story and practice it and practice it and tell it to a number of different people before they head for the stage. Because I've seen, not in Mosaic, but I've seen places where people are telling a story that's very troubling to them, and they've actually broken down and cried. Yeah. And that's not good for an audience, because you need to care for your audience. Because if you cry, then your audience begins to feel sorry for you, rather than helping you, bridge that gap. So I think telling the story over and over again. Place I like to tell stories. I often walk, and I walk every morning, but I often use that time for um, telling my story, practicing my story, and I practice gestures, and my neighbors all know when I'm doing a story because I'm waving my hands and that kind of thing. So just telling the story over and over again.
Max showed some slides of Moy Parr was the last one. I think
Yeah.
you said.
Yeah.
Her story was so very incredible. And one of the nice things we do at Mosaic when we get ready for a showcase is we partner up with people. So you get a coach to help have a good trusted critic to practice with. And I had the privilege of being Moy's coach. And when she first told me her story, of her heroine escape from Myanmar and how she got to America, when I went to her house, it was probably, she spoke to me for an hour. And I was in tears. And I think the thing that she had done on performance night, or what we worked on, is she told what she was comfortable telling. And she got that hour that we talked down to 6 minutes. And I remember this story because when she finished, everyone stood up and it was like standing ovation. It was so emotional. And I think we all cried a little bit at that moment. But those stories are so impactful, especially in our community that has such a rich Burmese population here, to share these stories. And sometimes language prevents us from knowing these stories. And I really admire Moy for what she did. Not only was she a great storyteller, but she was threading something that this community needed to know. And I was incredibly happy. That was a difficult story, and I couldn't have been more proud of the work that she did.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we've had others that have done the same thing, and it's just been wonderful to hear those stories.
Do you know how many storytellers Mosaic has put on the stage?
Oh,
Oh my
I didn't
goodness!
mean to put you on the spot, but it's we're another group shot. Every time you do a group shot. It's
we've
been
had
a lot.
about 80 people go through the workshop.
Yeah.
And not all those people decided to tell, but that I think it's about in the 70s or 80s that have taken the workshop, and most of those people have been on stage.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just extraordinary.
I think we've had 9 showcases so far, if I'm counting them right. This is where we need Annie to let me know. I think we have like 9 of them.
I think it's 8.
Is it 8?
I have 8 programs in my program book, or in my scrapbook. So I think 8.
So you can probably find some of these answers on the Facebook Mosaic Storytelling Showcase Facebook. I wanted to ask the question, what have you learned from storytelling? We'll start with you, Dick. What have you personally learned from storytelling?
Well, I think storytelling has helped me I used to be quite an introvert, and I felt uncomfortable around people, and in my college years or whenever, uh, and it's helped me to think on my feet, to be able to um, take events in my life and to share them with other people, and that's given me a great deal of joy, and I think I found out a lot about myself as I tell stories, personal stories. It I have to kind of evaluate who I am and what I'm doing and what I'm about. And it's helped me to be a better person, I think.
Oh, thank you. Nicole.
Well, I have to agree with Dick. I think storytelling has made me a better person by, first of all, making me realize that I'm not alone, which is a terrible thing for anyone to think. You get in a bad corner when you think you're the only one experiencing something. And I think storytelling throws a lot of light on the fact that that's not true. And secondly, it makes me more aware of the people around me. So I guess I'm not alone and I'm not the center of the universe. Those are the two things that storytelling teaches me continuously. So.
Well, we want to recruit more storytellers, and so just a little bit. We actually originally had plans to very quickly launch. We have this great new creative space at Willard Library, and we have a recording studio, or I'm sorry, a recording booth that we wanted to make available to people and advertise as a way to record your own stories for yourself, for your family, for posterity, whatever the case might be. But sort of do it in tandem with redeveloping our concert series and hopefully getting back on stage. Omicron threw a wrench in those plans, but it's not all bad. One of the things that we're going to start doing on Stories at Sundown is maybe not every week, although if we end up having that many storytellers, that's a good problem to have, but hosting storyteller on this program. And so we would like to have people interested in that. Maybe we'll ease into a concert a little bit by having maybe a small intimate audience at some point, whereas instead of Nicole looking at her laptop camera or at our faces or herself, there is a little bit of an audience that you might get some of that chemistry, and you online viewers can come on board as well. But then eventually also bring back the concerts. And so there's a few things we wanted to tell you about. There is a Facebook page for the Mosaic Storytelling Showcase. And if you are interested in learning more, becoming a storyteller, or you have a story you want to share, this site is always monitored. I hear tell that Annie's going to monitor it. So, but I think we can all take a turn at that as well. And you can check out previous concerts there as well, and previous classes. We also have a email address, mosaic@willardlibrary.org, easy to remember. So you can reach out anytime. Dick has volunteered to do some of his story swaps, which you saw some of those photos where people are sitting in groups where that's what they're doing. Right, Dick? They're swapping stories and doing kudos and questions.
I might point out that we put together, I don't know whether this will be seen or not, but these will be in the creative space at the library. And there are two of them at this point. There's one on learning the story, and that talks about the 3 Ps and some of the things that we talked about today. And then there's also a second one, and that's performing the story. And so there's a little difference between the two, but those will help you. We're not doing workshops at this point, but here's a sheet that will help you see kind of the process, and you can pick one of these up at the library. Yeah. I don't know whether they're quite ready yet, but they will be.
It'll be there tomorrow. They'll be there tomorrow.
Okay.
And if there's enough demand, we might even try a virtual story swap. We can give anything a whirl, right? We can give it a go. We'll see. In the meantime, check this space. We're going to go to our old. I got a couple of comments. There's too many technical things for me to pay attention to here. Thank you, Stephanie. Another of my colleagues. I neglected to mention that Moy is also a colleague of mine now at the library. So, and And thank you, Michael, Dick, and Nicole. We miss Mosaic. This is a delicious appetizer. So we promise, we promise, we promise. And if anybody wants to share the recorded story with Mosaic, we'd like to put them up on Facebook and other outlets to share with the community. And obviously, this program itself is also streaming to the Mosaic Facebook page as well as the library Facebook page. So you can check all these, and always you can check these recorded sessions on our Willard Library's YouTube page. So this was a lot of fun. Thank you both.
Yes, thank you.
And I'm only 27 seconds over what I said was our cutoff. 45 minutes, no longer than that. We did pretty
You know
good.
how to meet deadline.
Well, I'm very anxious to get going. So.
All right. So, any last words? Any parting thoughts?
Just if you even somewhat think you might have a story, don't hesitate to reach out to us.
Yeah. It's been amazing to watch people go through the process and find that, boy, I can do this. And some people have been back. So
yes. And hopefully we hear from those folks. If you're an alumni storyteller, get in touch with us.
All right.
We very much are looking forward to hearing from you.
All right. And thank you, audience. We will be back. Stories at Sundown comes back officially in March, but you may hear from us between now and then. We want to keep the excitement going for Mosaic. So Nicole and Dick, don't leave, but everybody else, you have a good night. Enjoy the snow if you can. And warm days are coming. Days are getting longer every day.
Yeah.
Take care.